Once upon a time, Joe Rogan said,
I'm very pro-choice. I'm very women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, trans rights. I'm even universal health care. Obviously, they're talking about deporting them. That drives me fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's
that kind of shit. And the hard right version of that is despicable.
But
the January 6th thing is important.
See, it is important,
And
but is it the 6 months later? Should be the ruling number one conversation of a journalist?
I think it's really important. And one of the reasons why I think it's important because it highlights the reasons why a guy like Donald Trump is so fucking dangerous. Is because a guy can incite a bunch of morons to do something really fucking stupid.
And then a few years later,
and it just came over the wires that Joe Rogan just endorsed me. Is that right?
I like him. I've grown to like him, but I don't consider myself a Republican.
How did Joe change, yet at the same time deny that he's changed at all? Now, this doesn't seem to make any sense, but what if I told you that this is actually completely rational once you understand three fundamental yet mind-blowing things about human psychology. Now I'm going to show you how being smart can actually make you stupid, the truth about tribal behavior, and the psychology behind our political divide. Not only will this teach you about Rogan and how he's changed, but it will also reveal truths about yourself. I'm Harris, and I'm going to simplify the psychology of people and politics. To understand how Joe changed, we need to look at an experiment on skin cream and what it tells us about human intelligence. A few medical researchers created this new skin cream to treat rashes. Now sometimes new treatments work, and other times they make rashes worse. And sometimes rashes improve when you don't do anything at all. The medical researchers created an experiment to figure out whether the new cream actually worked. One group received the skin cream, and then the other group did not. The researchers then analyzed how many patients who used the cream improved and how many got worse. Then they compared this group with the patients who didn't use cream at all. These were the results. So, does the skin cream work? The intuitive answer is yes. It does work because more people improved when using the cream than those who didn't. But this is actually incorrect. In the skin cream group, 223 people got better, while 75 got worse. Now this means 3 times as many people got better than got worse. Now let's look at the group that didn't use any skin cream. For 107 patients, the rash improved, but for 21 of them, it got worse. This means over 5 times as many people got better than got worse. So the true answer is that skin cream doesn't actually work because more people, 5 times as many, got better without using the cream, while only 3 times as many people got better when they used the cream. So why does this matter? Well, this is part of a made-up experiment that psychologist Kahan created to test the theory. The theory suggests that what limits people in believing about, let's say, climate change or vaccines is their ability to understand and interpret science. Now, Kahan's experiment shows that people's ability to understand scientific reasoning was directly related to their ability to answer a scientific question correctly. People who were better at numerical reasoning and enjoyed deep critical thinking were better at getting the questions right.
A numeracy is a kind of reasoning capacity. It's not so much the capacity to use complicated mathematics, but really to reason well about quantitative information.
Essentially, the smarter you are, the better you can understand facts and science. But there's more. This was only half of the experiment and only half of the story. Kahan repeated the skin cream experiment but replaced the skin cream with gun control laws. In this version of the experiment, Kahan told participants that the city was trying to decide whether to pass a new law banning concealed carry. The participants were told that the city's government wasn't sure if the law would address crime by reducing the number of guns on the streets or increase crime by preventing good people from defending themselves from criminals. Now, to test this, the government divided cities into 2 groups. One where concealed carry was already banned, and another where no such ban existed. Then they analyzed how many cities experienced a decrease in crime compared to an increase in crime. Now remember, all of this is completely made up. Participants were split into 2 groups. One group was given the outcome where the correct answer was banning concealed carry decreased crime, and the other group was given the outcome where the correct answer showed banning concealed carry increased crime. This is essentially identical to the skin cream example with just different labels. So, what happened?
Based on this data, of course, I'd want to look into it and look at all the sources. And of course, there are sources from sources because people are always citing each other.
So the numbers are actually not real whatsoever.
It looks, but if I were to look at this pragmatically, I would just say that the playing field seems pretty even here.
First, Kahan asked participants about their political ideology. Liberals were more likely to say that guns increase crime, while conservatives said guns reduce crime. Now, this is pretty unsurprising. But here is the crazy part.
The low numeracy people are about 25 percentage points less likely to get the right answer if that answer is threatening to their ideology than if it's consistent with their ideology. The people who are high in numeracy, on the other hand, 45 percentage points less likely to get the right answer if that answer is inconsistent with their political predispositions.
More intelligent people actually did much worse in the gun control version than the skin cream version.
But for the Republicans who are shown the table where gun control decreases crime, well, numeracy skills no longer affect accuracy. Those with a numeracy score of 7 or 8 are barely more likely to answer correctly than those with a score of 0 or 1. And the same is true in reverse for Democrats. The more numerate people in this sample have no problem recognizing the correct answer when it shows that gun control reduced crime. But if the data showed that gun control increased crime, then all of a sudden, numeracy didn't help.
Now, in the skin cream example, it didn't matter if you were liberal or conservative. If you had better numerical reasoning abilities, you were more likely to get the correct answer. But in the gun control example, the more liberal or conservative you were, being smarter made you less likely to answer the questions correctly if the correct answer went against your beliefs. See, this seems counterintuitive. Why would smart people who would otherwise think rationally about random things like skin cream fail to reason and use their intellect when it came to politically divisive topics? Our brains run on ancient software. Deep inside, there's these hidden processes that battle for control, like wanting to eat an entire block of chocolate but rationing it out over a healthy period of time, or forcing yourself to bed early for a 5 a.m. flight only to lie awake terrified that you'll miss the alarm. So what processes are at play in the gun control experiment? It begins with our primal instincts. Millions of years ago, survival meant one thing: stay with the tribe. Being cast out was essentially a death sentence. And despite evolving into these complex and sophisticated creatures that we are now, our tribal instincts still prioritize group loyalty over everything, even truth, which means they override our critical thinking processes. That's why we cling on to beliefs and moral sentiments even when facts punch us in the face. Now, this is actually called motivated reasoning, where you process information in ways that bends reality to fit your team's narrative rather than what the evidence actually objectively shows. Now, a great example of motivated reasoning in the real world is shown in the Flat Earth documentary Behind the Curve. Now, in the documentary, these flat earthers created this pretty accurate experiment that would prove once and for all whether the earth was flat or round.
You have a backup experiment. If you're seeing through this hole, through the next hole, and seeing the light at the backboard or at 17 feet off the water, the earth is flat. If he's holding it up at 23 feet high and we're seeing the light, well, that's because the earth's curved. So I should only be able to see it when it's at 17 feet.
And then when they got the results...
Okay, go ahead and drive down there, Enrique. You're going to hold the light there. Enrique, how high is your light?
17 feet.
I mean, it's as... we don't see you, Enrique. Lift up your light way above your head. Interesting. Interesting there. That's interesting.
See, motivated reasoning protects us from believing anything that doesn't align with our group. Because believing or doing anything that signals betraying your group can be very costly. Do you remember that peaceful day, January 6th in 2001?
We can't hold this, we're gonna get too many people. Look at this vantage point, man. We're trying to hold the alphabet. We're trying to hold the alphabet down. We lost the line. We lost the line.
That's when Trump asked Pence to deny Biden the presidency and to confirm himself as the president. So what actually happened when Pence went against Trump and MAGA's wishes? See, when Mike Pence refused to overturn the 2020 election, he didn't just defy Trump, he broke away from the tribe. And the tribe punishes defectors, or tries to at least. Now here's the interesting part, because average Joes, they adopt their tribe's facts, like a uniform. But superior critical thinkers, they weaponize logic. They use their intelligence to jump through complicated logical reasoning loops to manipulate the evidence to fit their beliefs. Now, there is a phenomenon called the Nobel disease, where several Nobel Prize winners have gone on to believe in wild and crazy ideas despite any evidence in favor of them. These are a few of the greatest minds in the world who have created things that have helped humanity in a massive way, while simultaneously believing in complete nonsense. Now take Kary Mullis. So he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1993 for inventing a tool that saved millions of lives. And yet, at the same time, he argued that HIV didn't cause AIDS and trusted astrology over peer review. Oh my gosh. Now, I know all of this seems completely upside down and lopsided, but it actually makes complete sense when you really think about it, because most people are completely capable of agreeing on the best available evidence on something like drinking, that if you drink more you're going to be a worse driver, or that paracetamol is an effective and mostly safe painkiller. Imagine a Texan coal miner. Science says that his job kills the planet, and admitting the truth could cost him his friends, his paycheck, his purpose. And if he doesn't believe in climate change, then there's no real consequence to him personally. Now just ask Megan Phelps Roper. She's an ex-member of the Westboro Baptist Church.
The good was my church and its members, and the evil was everyone else.
The church was started by my grandfather. It's about 70 to 80 people, and it's almost entirely my family.
From baseball games to military funerals, we trekked across the country with neon protest signs in hand to tell others exactly how unclean they were and exactly why they were headed for damnation.
We would go out and stand on public sidewalks with signs that said things that most people thought were extremely hateful. They said that God hated gay people, and then gay people deserved the death penalty. We would go and protest funerals. So we would go and tell people who were going to bury their loved ones God had killed that person and that he is punishing them for their sins and that they needed to repent. So we would be out there singing songs, chanting and being really happy about the fact that this person has died.
I couldn't justify our actions, especially our cruel practice of protesting funerals and celebrating human tragedy. These shifts in my perspective contributed to a larger erosion of trust in my church, and eventually it made it impossible for me to stay.
I was crying and I put my head in her lap, and I couldn't even articulating the idea of leaving was too much. Like it's terrifying. And it just seemed like impossible. And I said, we're never gonna see our family again. We're gonna lose everyone and everything that's ever been important to us. And so this back and forth, goes on for about 4 months before we finally actually left. And it was as bad or worse than I could have imagined.
In spite of overwhelming grief and terror, I left Westboro in 2012.
There is nothing else. This is not our home. This is not. I had been, in those 4 months, I had been so terrified of, because knowing what was coming. Just imagine you're going to lose everyone in your life. It's overwhelming. It's just. Wow.
What we believe in tells us about who we are. The most prominent psychological processes that govern us work to protect our idea of who we are and our relationships with the people we love and trust. Now, there really isn't anything inherently crazy or terrible about this, or at least there wasn't. It only became problematic when there was a massive divide between you and how you saw yourself and your tribe and how someone else and their tribe. Unfortunately, we've become increasingly divided, and our irrationality is dividing us even more. But how did we even get there? Why are we so divided? To solve this mystery, we're going to have to dive deep again into the psychology of people, politics, and most importantly, polarization. In the 1950s, the American Political Science Association released a call to action. In this super dense 98-page paper, this collection of the best political scientists pleaded for a more polarized political system. Now, I'm not joking. They wanted more polarization. See, these scientists said that the Republican and Democratic parties were way too similar and that their positions were diverse in basically the same way, which was confusing for voters to decide between them. They argued that parties needed to have definitive differences between them so citizens who didn't have the time to engage in politics could easily decide between them. It was about choosing parties that you trusted and aligned with your values. But the thing is, back then, being a Republican didn't actually mean you were a conservative, and being a Democrat didn't mean you were a liberal. It just meant that you were a Democrat or a Republican. That's it. It had very little to do with your principles or values. So the political scientists were like pleading for more polarization to make politics easier on the mind and soul. Be careful what you wish for. America is more divided now than in the 1950s, but how much more? Let's talk numbers. Okay, so the Pew Research Center has tracked US political opinion since 1994, and here's how the Republican-Democratic gap exploded in just 23 years. In 1994, about 30% of both parties agreed immigration strengthened the US. By 2017, Democrats soared to 84% and Republicans inched up just to 42%, and it's probably a lot lower now. Now, this isn't just reflected in social ideas, but also how people feel about each other. The feeling thermometer gauges people's attitudes towards both parties. You're asked to rate how you feel from 1 to 100, where 1 is cold and negative and 100 is warm and positive. It's basically like a political vibe check. Now, let's see how it's changed over the years. In the 1980s, voters gave their own parties a friendly 72. The opposition, well, they had a brisk 45. Not exactly friendly, but it's civil. Then things changed. Over the decade, the frostbite spread. By 2016, scores for the opposition nosedived to 29. Even loyalty to her own party cooled slightly from 72 to 65. But here's the twist. In the 70s, calling yourself a hardcore Democrat or Republican was like wearing a team jersey but secretly rooting for the rival every now and then. The thing is, these voters were wildcards. Look, like seriously, like pollsters couldn't pin them down on a lot of things. They would swing left on unions and right on taxes or bail on their party entirely. Loyalty was fluid. Remember, these were self-proclaimed diehard party devotees. Now, fast forward to today, and there are more independents than ever. They reject labels and claim to be above the political tags, but here's the kicker. They're as predictable as a rooster during sunrise. In fact, today's independent voters are more predictable than the strongest party supporters of the 50s. You heard that right. Independents of today aren't swing voters. They're stealth partisans. But why? There are two explanations. First, you could say it's tribal loyalty, but in disguise. Because independents don't like the badge of a party and they want the purity of being an independent. And admitting you're a partisan could feel like you're kind of joining a cult. Then there's a second explanation. But to understand this, we first have to figure out why there's so many independent voters today. See, most people feel each party appeals to the extremists on the left and the right, so the majority sit in the middle and feel pretty meh about both parties. But here's the crucial part. They don't feel meh about both parties equally. Most independents don't love a party. They hate one. Now, these are the conservatives who cringe at MAGA conspiracies but dread woke communism. Or the liberals who hate performative extremism but fear MAGA in this 1940s nostalgia. They vote against the party they find more revolting. See, it's not hope that drives them, it's fear. This is called negative partisanship. The inclination to vote against a party instead of voting for a party. I wonder if Joe is a negative partisanship voter. So Joe recently said that he isn't a Republican.
But I don't consider myself a Republican.
And he said this after getting Trump on his podcast.
Hello, world. Hello, world. We just wrapped up a great podcast.
Then endorsing Trump on X. Then getting a shout out during Trump's election win.
I want to thank some people real quick. And last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan.
Then going to Trump's inauguration, but sure, he's not a Republican. He does support abortion after all. Did I mention he endorsed Texas Governor Greg Abbott? I'm sure Joe knows about Abbott's abortion ban in Texas, which is one of the strictest ones in America, banning procedures as early as 6 weeks into the pregnancy. Now, he's also friendly with Tucker Carlson, the guy who spent years spewing lies on Fox News, where Fox lost nearly like 800 million in lawsuits over election denial lies. Joe often cites Fox News on his podcast, the platform that legally is classified as entertainment, not news, even though he's not a Republican. Now, based purely on what he says, sure, he's not. But he does tend to be way more critical of the left. Now, it also helps that his entire social network, especially after moving to Texas, became more right-leaning, who shared these and more extreme right-wing views. So it's hard to say how Joe feels about the Republican Party, but he's definitely way more critical and negative about the Democratic Party, which is probably the driving force behind his change, a change that he still doesn't believe in. Why is that? See, here's the thing. When we change our minds on political issues, it often feels sincere. We view this as a change in our position, not our identity. This is why Joe doesn't think he's a Republican. But when we see those in political opposition to us, we think that they are lying and hypocritical. So while changing our minds can be seen as lunacy to some, it can also be a sign of intellectual growth, right? Because isn't it good to change your mind when new and better information and better arguments present themselves? So in that case, how do you differentiate political opportunism from intellectual growth? See, a misunderstood idea about rationality is that it's an individual sport, that you curate your arguments in your mind and independently come to correct conclusions. Unfortunately, this is not the case, because reasoning, especially in the political domain, is actually a team sport. We rationalize in groups in ways that serve the group. And this is actually a rational thing to do, because the alternative, rationalizing in ways that get you kicked out of your group, is much more dangerous and therefore irrational. See, we're wired to choose belonging over facts. After all, what's going to be more costly, being wrong or being alone? Dan Kahan said it best. We are perfectly rational when we fool ourselves. Was Joe rational about abortion? And more importantly, do you think you're rational about abortion? Find out by checking out this video.